there's a Dorothy Parker quote that I love that is familiar. I agree with you, Celine, which is I hate writing, but I love having written.
Right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Hollywood Reporter's Writer Roundtable. I'm Scott Feinberg, and I am so happy to be joined by the writers of 6 of 2023's most outstanding screenplays. Let's meet them. We are joined by Tony McNamara, the writer of Poor Things, a screenplay adapted from Alistair Gray's 1992 novel of the same name about a young Victorian woman resurrected by a scientist following her suicide who goes out into the world an uninhibited innocent. Celine Song, the writer of Past Lives, an original screenplay about a young Korean immigrant living in New York who winds up at a bar with her childhood sweetheart from Korea and her husband from New York. Eric Roth, the writer of Killers of the Flower Moon, a screenplay adapted from David Grant's 2017 book of the same name about the Native Americans of Osage Nation who held oil rights worth vast fortunes and the white men who preyed upon them in 1920s Oklahoma. Chloe Domont, the writer of Fair Play, an original screenplay about a newly engaged couple whose relationship dynamics are jolted when the hedge fund at which they both work promotes the woman but not the man. Cord Jefferson, the writer of American Fiction, a screenplay adapted from Percival Everett's 2001 novel Erasure, about a black college professor who writes books that nobody reads because he is told they are not black enough, and then out of disgust writes one under a pen name employing all of the stereotypes that he disdains. Thank you. And Andrew Haigh, the writer of All of Us Strangers, a screenplay adapted from Taichi Yamada's 1987 novel Strangers, about a gay man living in present-day London who visits his childhood home and finds living there the parents who he lost 30 years earlier when he was just 12. Thank you all for coming from near and far to do this. We're thrilled to have you. And I think to begin with, I'd like to ask you each about the origin story of these projects, and then we'll loosen it up after that. But Chloe, you've been climbing the ranks in the world of TV for a few years, writing on shows like Ballers and directing on shows like Billions. My understanding is that things were going on in your own life at the same time that may have motivated you to sit down and write Fair Play, your first produced feature-length screenplay. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the story had been compounding for years, and I think it really kind of came together. It was this feeling I was having at the time when my career started to take off in television, and it was this feeling that my success didn't feel like a total win. It felt like a loss on some level, and it was because of the relationships I was in, and these were relationships with men who, on the one hand, adored me for my strengths, my ambition, what I was trying to do. But there was this unspoken feeling and tension that me being big on some level made them feel small. And it just made me realize how much hold these ingrained power dynamics still have over us today. So that's something that I wanted to sink my teeth into.
Fantastic. Andrew, you have written and directed some truly beautiful films over the last decade plus. We're talking about Weekend, 45 Years, Lean on Pete. But if I'm not mistaken, you have generally originated, you've brought the material to others and said, this is what I want to do. In this case, it started a little bit differently, right?
Yeah, it came to me. Someone sent me the novel. And I think whether I'm adapting something or whether it's an original screenplay, I need to be able to connect on a very deep level, whatever that material is, personally connect with it in some way or other. And they sent me the novel, and it's a very traditional ghost story, I think, in a Japanese sense. But that central idea of meeting your parents again long after they've gone, and I would say my parents are actually still alive. There was something about that reunion, and that reunion with the past, and what that can do to you, and how it can make you remember, relive very sort of painful experiences, and how reliving that in a very visceral sense can help you move on, can help you find perhaps some kind of liberation. And I remember when I read the novel, it felt so personal to the writer. I've never met the writer of the book. Maybe it wasn't personal to him, but it felt personal.
Right.
And I felt like I had to do the same thing and throw myself into that novel as much as I could. And so that became my adaptation process, was take this idea, put myself into that story, and see what comes out.
Cord, you've been a journalist, you've written for TV, and it's kind of amazing how you move between comedies, Master of None, The Good Place, and dramas, Succession, and then Watchmen, which you won your Emmy for. What led you to Erasure, and were you actively looking for something to write a feature-length screenplay about?
I had a horrible 2020. I don't think that's unique to any of us here. We all had a bad 2020, I think. If you didn't have a bad 2020, I would like to talk to you as to why. But besides the COVID thing, I had a really big professional failing that year where I came very, very close to getting a TV show on the air, and then at the last minute it was killed. And so I was kind of adrift toward the end of the year, trying to figure out what my next creative project would be, and I just by chance read this review for this novel called Interior Chinatown. And the review said that there was a satire reminiscent of Percival Everett's Erasure. And so I went and read a synopsis of Erasure and sounded interesting, so I bought it. And I don't know if you guys have ever had a feeling, I had a feeling that the book was written specifically for me. Like it was as if somebody sat down to write Cord Jefferson a book. It was like I was 20 pages into it and I was like, oh my God, I might want to adapt this, and 50 pages into it, I thought maybe I want to direct this, and then I started reading the novel in Jeffrey Wright's voice. That's how early I started thinking of Jeffrey for it. It just felt, the themes of like the professional, sort of what it means to be a writer of color, and sort of like the restrictions people put on your life, and sort of like the stories that you can tell because of your identity. That was stuff that I'd thought about, since I was a journalist. And then the more I got into it, there was a bunch of family stuff that I really empathized with and understood. And so I just felt like I understood it deep in my bones in a way that I hadn't before. It just resonated with me deeper than any piece of art had before or since.
Tony, you previously wrote another film that Yorgos Lanthimos directed. That was 2018's The Favorite. Then you remained in the period royal world with The Great on TV, which I think had even been gestating before The Favorite. Yeah. And now you're back with Yorgos for Poor Things. How did you and he begin working together, and how did this follow-up project come about?
We began working together. He had a script for The Favorite that he liked the idea of, but he didn't like the script, and he was reading a lot of writers, and he just read something I'd written, and I didn't know anything. He hadn't made any of his English films at that point. So I went and watched they said, do you want to work with this Greek director? There's no money. And I went and watched his film, and I was like, Dogtooth, and I was like, I'll do it for free. He's amazing. So, and then we worked on The Favorite, and we had a really good time. And so just before we were going into production, he came, but he had told me about Alistair's book. And when he really loved it, but he couldn't get anyone to give him any money to get someone to write it. But then he'd made The Lobster, and he kind of went, people will give me money, do you want to do it? And then I read it, and it was such a wild story and such a crazy premise of this, like a Frankenstein story, but she's pregnant, and when I first read that, I was like, what? They take the baby's brain out and put it in her head, and I'm like, it's a comedy, right? But I read it, it was such a great screenwriting challenge, because it seemed fun, it seemed really hard to make a movie out of it, and also what was really interesting about it was the book told the whole story from the men's perspective. Her story is never told by her until the last 2 pages. And so we kind of immediately, that was the character he wanted to kind of, Bella was the character, but it gave us this great freedom because we had everyone else's view of it. And also that was the key to the movie for me, because I was like, oh, this is a movie about control of someone's story, control of someone, how you enter the world, and everyone wants to control your ideas, your upbringing, how you see the world, your body, and it became like a really key to how I could kind of see the movie, and it became really, I knew it was an interesting movie on a philosophical level, as well as be this wild ride that was sort of slightly unhinged. So yeah, so I said yes.
Brings us to Eric Roth. You have been at this first, let's say, for I think about 50 or more years, almost 60 years as a writer, so a wealth of knowledge here. And
good luck to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to just mention a few things here. Forrest Gump, The Insider, Munich, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, A Star is Born, Mank, and Dune, and those are only the ones that got nominated for Oscars. So, and winning for Forrest Gump. How did you and Martin Scorsese, who I don't believe you'd worked with before, connect for Killers of the Flower Moon?
I gave them my take, and they decided to say, okay, give it a whirl. and I spent like a year plus on it, and they gave me their notes. I tried to fix those as bad as they might have been. And then, I'm kidding, some were good, some were bad. Anyhow, they were good. Very nice, Dan Friedkin and Bradley Thomas, very good producers. And then I went to Marty, and Marty felt this was something special. And I felt the same way when I was doing it. It showed the lack of education I had. I never knew anything that this existed. It reminded me of the Tulsa Massacre, which was part of the same thing, 1921, that I knew nothing about. And I said, what is going on?
Yeah.
You know? And plus, I knew about the erasure, as you say, of the Native Americans. That I knew about. I had written a script called Comanche earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd never seen something that was as heinous as this in some ways. And I became very passionate about it. And I'm very passionate about research also.
Yeah.
And Marty and I set out, and I'll just be quick now, but we decided we were going to make a gigantic Western. John Ford, we were going to start it actually with the Oklahoma land rush, which would have taken about a month. And it slowly became something else. Marty said, quite right up front, I don't want to do a whodunit. I want to know, because we all did, you know, that we were all culpable. And it was a long assignment, like 8 years, which isn't the longest. I have many more. But, you know, it's pandemic. He made another movie, but we worked. It was, I think it defined collaboration of a certain kind. It was a wonderful relationship. He's I'll be obsequious for a moment. He's a wonderful man I've worked with. If you say, I think I want to do the movie backwards, he'll try it.
Celine, you had spent the decade or so before past lives as a very admired playwright, but my understanding is that you were very consciously trying to move into film. It wasn't, you know, sometimes it's an accident or whatever. In this case, you were looking to do that. What convinced you to make this story, which is personal in ways that I'll ask you to talk about? Why was this the story that would be the one for your transition into film?
Well, I think that it all goes back to the this particular feeling that I had, and sometimes you just have to chase the feeling that you have in your own life. And it was a feeling that I got where I was sitting in this bar in East Village in New York City, sitting between my childhood sweetheart, who had come to visit me from Korea, who's now a friend, and my husband that I live with in New York City. And because they do not speak each other's language, and I do, I was translating between these two people. Who cared for me and knew me very differently. And what was so clear is that in that moment, I was sort of becoming a bit of a bridge or a portal between not just these two people and these two cultures and these two languages, but also parts of my own self and my own history. And I think at that moment, I just felt so full and massive. You know, I felt very big. And I think that strange feeling that I had in that night, I think it's really stayed with me for a long time until I decided that it was something that I wanted to write. Because, and I think it really did just come from the feeling that, yeah, but I wanna talk about it, and I'm just wondering if other people are going to also know this feeling. And I think it really did come from the question of like, yeah, this is how it felt like for me sitting there. How does it feel for you? Like, did this feel like that for you? And I think it became a script from there more than anything.
That's great. So, Celine and Chloe, your lives, as we've established, helped inspire your screenplays. But for the other four of you who have adapted pre-existing material, Andrew alluded to this a little bit when he was speaking earlier, that he has to have it feel a bit personal. He tailored it to be a character who wasn't gay in the book is gay in the screenplay. So how important is it, and anyone please jump in, to feel that personal connection if it's not material that's originating from your own life?
I don't think you can go past page or word one without the passion for it. So you have to find something that's important to you, and what does it say to you? You know, so that's how it felt with that.
I don't think I look for necessarily a literal that's me or something, but I think I have to feel it. Like I have to read it and go, I feel like I know something in this story is about me without knowing what it consciously is. I've got to know that I feel what they're being thrown into the world, like Ballard not really knowing what the fuck you're doing is a feeling, and I have to know what it's, you know, I kind of feel like, without being too literal about it, I just read it and I assume there's something, because I've connected with it, I assume it'll come when I write it, rather than feel like I have to, you know, it's like even God, when the scientists, like, I know what it's like to be a father who loves their child too much and doesn't want them to go anywhere because you want to protect them. In the same way, I know I want to get out in the world and see what the world will hammer me into. So you can know those things without, I guess, for me anyway, it's just kind of an instinct that I feel like there's something in there for me.
I just think that there's, you know, I'm fortunate because the book that I found was about a Black writer. so I lucked out in that, and I'm like, oh, I know this guy. He's about a Black writer who lives in LA. Okay, yeah, I get this. But I think that, you know, the sort of, for when you're not, I mean, just to be any good writer, I think that you have to, you know, so for instance, when I worked on Succession, I don't know any white billionaires, right? And I sort of like, if you were to tell me that I had to write a show about this sort of like conservative billionaire family, I sort of go in there and I'm like, well, I'm not going to be interested in these people because I have nothing to relate to them about and they have nothing to relate to me about. But I think the reason that Succession works is, and sort of the reason why people loved it so much, was that, you know, people don't know anything about being white billionaires necessarily, but they know what it's like to sort of have this sibling rivalry and to want to impress your father, who's never sort of like given you his entire sort of heart and soul, right? And they know what it's like to have, you know, these sexual hangups and to have these drug addiction problems. Like, all of the stuff that makes human beings is sort of what you understand and can empathize with. And so when you get to that kind of show, or when you sort of read a book or something, or and you're reading a character who's a woman and you're a man, or vice versa, I just think that sort of, you know, you just need to tap into the things that make people human beings, and sort of like, what is it about this human being that you can relate to that has nothing to do with necessarily their class or their race or their gender. It's just kind of like, what's the humanity that you can find. And I think that to me is always that's always the first important question when you sit down to write something, is like, what does this human being have in them that I have, and how can I tap into the emotions that they're going to have?
And it's why we read and watch films anyway, is to connect. We all want to connect. We all want to understand ourselves, understand each other. So it makes sense that any material you get is like, oh no, I understand something that is being got at here. There is something that's being discussed and talked about that I'm interested in. So I think you have to, for me personally, I have to feel that.
A bunch of you have come to writing films via writing TV. Chloe, Cord, Tony, Andrew, you had done film, but then went and did Looking and came simultaneously. What do you guys find to be the biggest differences between writing for one medium versus the other? Celine, of course, coming from theater, same kind of, you know, just as you've made those transitions, some of you quite recently now, what struck you the most about the different art form?
My movie Past Lives had to be a film because it's about endings. It's about the finiteness of time. So actually it is suited for film. And I think different stories are suited for different mediums. And I think part of the reason why I wanted to make Past Lives as a movie is because I know what is required in theater, because I was there for 10 years. So the thing about theater is that it is its relationship to time and space is very different than the relationship that film has. And in theater, time and space is figurative. So time and space can be as small as a light change, or just the way that an actor turns and looks at someone. So theater, it's in a way, even though it's happening in usually a room, it is going to move very differently than in film. And because Past Lives, the villains of the story is time and space. It's 24 years and 24 years and Pacific Ocean. That's the villains of the story. So in that situation, those things needed to be depicted literally. So that's why I felt like it needed to be a scene in a filmic way, because you need to feel the tangibility of the time and space in a way that in theater, you don't need to.
And I guess the thing I love about film is the collaboration with the director, and that I know, like when I write for Yorgos, I'm like, I wonder what he'll do. I sort of know, but I sort of also, he's going to bring something that's not me. And I think that's what's interesting. And as a writer, working with a good director, they make you a better writer and they push you and they collaborate with you. And I think when I do a film, I know I'm ultimately serving them. But I also work with directors who let me bring what I bring and kind of, so I think that's what I like about that. And then TV's kind of different. I mean, it depends. If you're show running, then you have a lot of control, almost too much because it's tiring. But I think that they're the differences, I guess. And then for me, the screenwriting, writing a screenplay for a film, it's such a pure, it has to be it's such an unforgiving thing as a piece of work. Whereas TV, you got 10 hours and you can probably make a lot more mistakes and get away with it to some degree. But I think with a screenplay, they're really tight machine-like things, and you've got to find the heart of it, and you've got to find the simplicity of it that'll give you the complexity. And so that's such a beautiful challenge. And when you're working with a director, that you go, they're going to ask so much of you that you'll bring things you didn't know you had in you that in your own TV show maybe you can't, because no one's pushing you in that way.
I mean, in my experience, I feel like, I mean, I what they say I feel like is cliche, but I think it's kind of true, and I think it's changing. But I do feel like TV is a writer's medium, and film is a filmmaker's medium. But it is changing, and you have filmmakers more and more in television that are having more control. But for me, when I was working in television, I was serving other people's vision, and I was the director. I was the day player. So for me, my movie was my baby. That was finally my story that I got to tell. I think I'm super grateful for all those experiences in television. I felt like television was kind of like boot camp for me, like gearing up towards making my first feature, because it was just, the experiences were invaluable. And what I'm so grateful for in those experiences of television, it taught me to think so fast and just constantly, like, really, it was like boot camp. You just have to pivot. You don't have time, and not that you have much time in independent films either. Right. But I would say, television. It's like I shot a 1 hour action show that was. We shot 60 pages in 7 days with actions and stunts, and yeah, it's crazy, like the pace that it moves. But I think just the having to pivot so quickly and all of that was just you're honing your craft and your muscle, and you get to try out things on someone else's dime, and it's not necessarily something that's your baby, so you're not as precious about it. But yeah, I think they're very, very different.
I feel the same way that everybody else does when they're saying sort of about how, I don't have necessarily the best perspective on it, because I didn't just hand over the script to a director. I sort of did it myself. And so I'm not sure what the difference would have been. I think that I do know that one of the reasons why I was interested in making the film is because I really wanted to challenge myself. I worked on a lot of great TV shows, and I'm like forever grateful for those experiences, and I learned a lot, and I really enjoyed my time there. But there was always kind of a voice in the back of my head that was like, do you think you can do this on your own? Like, are you sort of like riding on the coattails of other people? Can you execute something on your own? Because you are always in service of somebody else's vision. And I'd had a very difficult time getting TV shows on the air. As I just said, I came very close a few times, and it never happened. And so there was always kind of this chip on my shoulder that was like, can you do this? Do you think you can actually do it? And so being able to execute that was great. I think that it is different in many ways, but I think that, I found a lot of similarities. I found, one of the things that I was really happy about that I was able to bring from TV to film, hopefully, one of the reasons why I like making TV and watching TV is that I think that TV, because of the time, allows you to be discursive and digressive and sort of like go to weird places and sort of like spend time with these characters in a very real, nuanced, layered, complex way. And so I think that when I got to film, there's some characters in my movie that aren't driving the plot forward. And I actually got some notes from people that were like, do you actually need this person? Do you actually need this scene? Like this, what is this? What does this have to do? You could get from A to B faster if you sort of eliminate this. And I thought that, I was like, there's no way in hell I would ever do that, because I think that, I want to do more than just drive the plot forward. I want to sort of like service these characters and make them feel like real lived in human beings. And that is important. And that is important to the satisfaction of an audience watching this thing. Like that's why they care about these things in the first place. And so I'm actually really happy that I started out in TV, because I think I learned a lot of lessons that were helpful when it comes to storytelling that I could apply to the film.
The thing that I struggle with TV is what something Celine said about endings. Like for me, when I'm coming up with a story, the ending is so important to that story. And TV is so different. You never know if your TV show is going to be cancelled, which they often are. Mine was cancelled. And you expect it to happen, sort of. So you never really quite know where you're going to go. And I struggled with that because it's so important. I don't know how you can tell a story unless you know what the ending is. And I think there's so many more voices in TV, which can be great, but there's also different demands. Like, that the audience is sitting there and they're on their phone, and maybe they're doing that when they watch films too, let's face it. But they're, the washing machine's going off and stuff's happening and the doorbell's ringing. And so you have to constantly keep their attention. And I quite like not to keep people's attention sometimes. I want them to like drift off a little bit and sort of sink into the story. And TV, you can't do that. You'll get notes like, I'm bored. People are turning off. You've got to keep them in that first 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
It is hard because you have to sort of write endings that aren't actual ending. Do you know what I mean? You're right, especially towards the end of a season, you sort of got some great ending that isn't really an ending because you want another season. So you're always not quite, it's not quite serving the characters in the way, or you're sort of like some weird shell game where you're like, yes, it's the ending, but not really because there's 10 more.
And then if you get cancelled, which lots of you do, then the thing doesn't exist as a whole. It's just ended. And so you've got this thing that essentially disappears from the world. Whereas a film, you can watch it from 20 years later. It's like, there it is. That's that thing.
Well, I was going to say, I've done it the other way from movies to television.
Yes.
I'm not sure this was the best thing, but we did House of Cards,
Yes.
and we all know the result of it. But I found, and I've done like 6 other TV shows, and I never did any writing except for dealing with the showrunner and then giving my Yoda notes and he'd tell me to blow it out, And but I found it a little too analytical, to be honest with you. I felt you could get into moments, and I think some of the television is getting better. Like Succession, I think, where, it's, I'm very close with the, unfortunately, bad Alzheimer's, David Milch, and I got to write on Deadwood and stuff. But, and that where he gave you permission to you could do a one-off and just have characters, really have some intimacy. But I find a lot of the television, I'm not saying that some of it's just brilliant, but.
I didn't know you wrote on Deadwood, man. You're even more of a legend. Jesus, that is unbelievable. You wrote on Deadwood, dude? My goodness.
I want to springboard off of something that Andrew said about, I don't know how you can write without knowing the ending. I want to pose that to Chloe and Celine because I guess, yes, your films, your original scripts are personally rooted in personal things, but when you sat down to write them, did you have to know exactly where it was going to end up, or do you find that along the way?
I knew the ending before I knew the beginning. For me, I wanted to make a thriller about power dynamics in a relationship, and really on the ugliest level. But for me to talk about the ending, you kind of have to talk about what happens in the bathroom. So for me, the film always had to escalate to sexual assault because when you break it down, like sexual assault isn't really about sex, it's about power. And that's what I was exploring. And so what happens in the bathroom, that is the only way for Luke to reclaim the power over Emily in that moment through physical dominance. So because that happens and because I knew it had to go there, then it was like the ending is about Emily reclaiming the power that Luke takes away from her. And I also, for me, it was like I decided to tell the story through the lens of a thriller. And my intention was to manipulate the genre, and twist it to service something that I felt like had to be told now. But I do feel like no matter how much you twist genre, you still have to pay it off. Yeah. So for me, the ending was about where genre and the story kind of comes together in one punch. And since I was working within the thriller genre, that is a genre that uses violence as a means, to solve conflict. So for me, it always had to get violent. but it's the ending was never really about like female revenge. Like while there are elements of female fury and female rage, the whole movie really builds up to the moment that she gets Luke to mutter the words "I'm nothing" and finally submit to his own inferiority, because really, like that's I've kind of said, more than being a film about female empowerment, this is really a film about male fragility. So the film resolves when he submits to that, and that's where it needed to end.
For me, the ending was I think similarly to what Chloe's talking about, I needed to know the ending for me to actually do the whole thing. But the way, if you talk about like how the process is, because I work pretty structurally, I'm a pretty structural person when it comes to that. So I had to figure out the structure of the opening and the ending being connected for me to actually write the whole thing. So like it was, it was like 4 months of procrastination and just writing just random dialogue from the final scene that I imagine will happen. So it's like I just have like a random thing open just where I'm just like writing like, well, this piece of dialogue, whatever. And then I think at the end of those 4 months, there was a moment where I figured out in the beginning has to be the ending, and in the ending it has to be the beginning.
So it wasn't like from day one, there's a framing, we're going to do a framing device. That was not at all.
I knew what the story was, but
Yeah.
I didn't know that frame was going to exist. And then, of course, once I knew the framing, and then, of course, then all the dialogue that I've been playing with for 4 months, I know where they're going to go.
Right.
And then from there, I could write the whole thing in one breath.
Right.
And then it goes really fast. But until I crack the structure, usually it takes me months of hanging out.
Now, even for the folks at the table who adapted, doesn't mean you're doing it beat by beat the way the novel or the book was. Eric, I could see that you kind of lit up when we were talking about this. Please. Yeah.
First of all, bad books make great movies. Bad plays make better movies.
Yeah.
And because you have the freedom to be original with it. I mean, I always know the beginning and the end. I mean, I spend way too much time on the beginning, and they say mathematically what I spend on the end is like ridiculous. You don't give enough time to it. But I must say, I don't know if this is a brag or not, but every movie I've ever made has had the same beginning and ending, except for Munich.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's very scene that I imagine as the beginning and wrote, and the end. And some might have been from the book. I have to really think back.
Yeah.
The end was different in Munich only because he reconstructed the World Trade Center. But it was the same thing, a conversation.
Cord, I mean, both the beginning and the ending of your film are so memorable. And I think that the ending was not at all what necessarily, or not exclusively what happens at the end of Erasure. So just talk us through how you got there.
When I was adapting Erasure, I knew that I was going to have to make some pretty big changes in order to make it a movie and make it cinematic. It's I think the movie that I made is a little less cynical than the book. The sort of changes that I had to make, I knew were going to be big in some areas, but I always wanted to maintain the essence and the spirit of what Percival had tried to execute. And so, the book's pretty metatextual at points, and so you get some surreality there. And so I wanted to find ways to insert that in the film while still keeping it grounded in many ways. And so, I frequently write with no idea what the ending is going to be. Like I appreciate everybody's style, but like sometimes I come in and I'm like, yeah, I know what the ending is going to be, but sometimes I'm just like, let's just go for it and see what happens. And so this was one of those instances where I just wrote an ending that I was not happy with, that I knew was going to have to change at some point. And so we got about a month out from pre-production, and I was on a long drive to Joshua Tree for this wedding, and I had to talk about the ending with one of the producers. And he said, he called me and said, he said, the movie's a big swing. The movie's audacious. Try to write an ending that feels like a big swing, that feels as audacious as the rest of the film. And so I thought about that. I slept on it that night. And then I woke up the next morning and I wrote the ending pretty quickly. I'm a very, very, very slow writer. I'm a very slow writer and a very slow reader. But I wrote the ending in about 15 minutes. Wow. It just sort of like came to me, and it was just like, oh, okay, this is what it should be. And so I sent it in, and there was some, reluctance from people who were a little nervous that it was going to be too much of a big swing, but you know, a lot of other people were just kind of like, yeah, this is it. And that's why I think I wrote it so fast, is because I thought of it and I was like, oh yeah, this is, sometimes you just have the thing where it's like, oh yeah, this is what it needs to be. Like I figured it out. And so it came to me really quickly, but it is a, you know, it's a big departure from the ending of the book. But to me, I've tried to think of endings that would be as satisfying to me, and I haven't been able to think of one. But that is, you know, we came right up to right before pre-production. So it was like, you know, sometimes you just got to like build it as you got to jump off the cliff and build the plane on the way down. That's sort of like, that's sometimes my method.
I think it's about, for me, it's about like a question and then an answer. So you're answering something that you set up, like, and I have to sort of know what that answer is. I don't need to know what it is on a plot level. And with this, I sort of had no idea on a plot level how I was necessarily going to end the film, but I knew what I wanted it to feel and feel for that main character. Like all of my films are actually so single protagonist. Like I think there's probably 5 shots in all of my films that don't include that single protagonist. They're in all over it, and every single shot of almost the whole film. And so it's about what is that journey that he's going on or she's going on, and what do I need to feel at the end has happened to that character. So I sort of know that from the beginning, and thematically I know how I'm trying to get there. I don't always know how the plot is going to help reveal the themes that I'm trying to talk about, but I know where I want to end and start.
I want to start with Andrew, but ask all of you if there was a scene that maybe the one that you've received the most feedback about from people who you've talked to at Q&As or whatever, and if you can just take us into a little bit of how you cracked that scene. If it was, sometimes it can be a 15-minute process to do something that blows people away, but just to dissect little case studies from each of your films. Let's start with you, Andrew, if we can.
Yeah, I think my film works for different people in different ways, I think. But for me, there's a scene where he talks to his dad about how he felt growing up in the 80s, growing up gay in the 80s. And to me, that was such an essential scene. It's a film about the pain that we keep inside that stays in us, even though life changes and we move on and we get older, and I'm 50 now, and I can be dragged back to how I felt when I was 13, 14, 9 in an instant. Sometimes you just need the smallest of trigger and you're like, oh my God, I'm a child again and I feel terrified, or everyone's going to hate me, or I'm going to be like kicked out on the street, all those kind of things. So that scene with the son and the father, where he gets to talk to the father and sort of ask, why weren't you there for me? Why didn't you understand? Why didn't you come into my room when I was crying? And for the dad to answer that in an honest way was really fascinating for me. To sort of, I wanted to be compassionate to parents and children in the situation, especially in relationship to queerness and how that relates to family. And so that was quite a powerful scene to do, and it was certainly emotional for me to make. And it was like, as I say, my dad is still alive, but he's got dementia now, so I never get to have those conversations. So it was a very strange experience doing it, because I felt like I was having a conversation with my own father that I won't ever have with my father, but somehow it just being in the world made me understand myself and understand him, I suppose, in a lot better.
Tommy?
Wow. I think there's a scene, well, I guess there's one scene that people have mixed. When Bella first takes a job at the brothel, because of her nature, her immediate response is to change the way the whole brothel works. And this idea that she comes down and go, why don't we pick the men? Because then otherwise, and she explains to the guy, otherwise you won't feel the horror we feel when you come to us. And I think it was a pivotal scene for us, because it was, how do we tell this story about this person who has, I think for me, it was like her optimism of adventure and her ability to not know anything about the rules of society. So to be able to kind of consistently come up with her own and consistently kind of skirt around our social mores and how we would approach anything was kind of like something I loved about the character, because she sort of had this optimism about the adventure of her life, and that the questions you ask, the questions we ask society are what changes society, and her ability to continually keep coming back and asking those was something I loved about the character, and I loved about the way Emma loved that about the character and played that.
I think that the scene that everybody who's seen the movie usually talks about is the very final scene where my main character Nora walks with her childhood sweetheart to a spot in the to get him picked up for an Uber, and then of course the Uber comes, and then her friend gets in the car and leaves, and then she turns around and she walks home crying. And I think that to me, it really did begin with this thought of, first of all, trying to find that street more than anything. And I think amazingly, this thing that in the script was very much about, and then she walks home crying was really the, she walks home crying. And of course, there was a description about what kind of a cry it is and things like that. But none of that was unlocked until we found the street that this walk was going to happen. And then my DP asked me, and it was a practical question when we actually found the street, which my DP found. He asked me which direction should Nora and Haesung walk to the Uber. And my answer was so clear because of the way we wanted to shoot it, that that street looked like a timeline. And of course, Nora and Haesung should walk into the past. So it would have to happen from right to left, walk into the past, and then wait there for an Uber for 2 minutes. And then when the Uber comes, the Uber is going to also drive him into the past. And then, of course, then Nora would have to turn around and start walking towards her present and the future. And I think that, I feel like cracking that, that street being a timeline, then of course informed the rest of the film. As in, then of course, the language of the film was then built out of the decision that about treating these walks like it's about time itself. And I think that really was all of it.
Well, I'd say two things. One was I never knew if it was going to work once Leonardo decided to switch characters, as to if we're being able to show, which I believe to be true, that this man loved this woman and was trying to kill her. And it was complicated until he did it. And I thought he did it with great tenderness on one hand, on the other being complicit in this. I'm not sure people talk about it one way or the other. I think they wonder what was his feelings about it. I think I mentioned some of the guys here about, we could only think of 3 examples, was Desdemona, talented Mr. Ripley, and maybe His Place in the Sun that ever had that. And I think if you watch the movie, you'll see where Leonardo is amazing at being able to pull that off, his confusion and then his tenderness with her. And I think he did love her. In doing the research, the real man wanted his ashes when he had cancer and was dying spread over the Osage Hills. So he had some great feeling about this place, and on the other hand, wanted to murder people, The other thing, which is more about the theme of the movie, which is equally important, is that the complicity of people. And I think I'm not sure people have talked about it or not, but I think the fire in the movie is really important. Marty kept telling me, anytime we have anybody look out the window, I want him seeing people who would walk over dead people and wouldn't care about it. And so that we always had that feeling, whether a banker or a farmer, and then that fire scene, which was kind of a metaphor for that.
Yeah. I think the most talked about actually scene is the opening sex scene, which was written about as the most shocking sex scene, which is, I think, hilarious. But it was also the trickiest scene, and I rewrote. I think I rewrote that scene more than any other scene, because, I mean, first of all, I was looking for a shocking way to get to both hook the audience, and grab them, but also get you to fall in love with these characters, and you have to fall in love with them. And also because structurally, it's like things have to get going, story has to get moving. You really have to fall in love with them in this scene, because it kind of turns pretty quickly. So it was, and I knew that they had to get engaged, and so it was like, how can I show a fun engagement proposal that's absurd and messy, and for me that was if he had blood on his face. I was like, he has to propose to her with blood on his face, and I think that it was something that some audiences and some more conservative audiences are too shocked by, you know. But for most people, it makes you fall in love with him, which I think is you have to, you know, for where the story goes. And also what I wanted to set up too is that I wanted to set up to the audience, like, you know, this is a man that's on some level not threatened by women because he has her blood on his face. You know, how could he be threatened by a woman if he has her blood on his face? But that's what I was really trying to sink my teeth into with this character, is that he's not one or the other. You know, this is a man who represents many generation of men caught in the middle between wanting to adhere to a modern feminist society, but still having been raised on traditional ideas of masculinity. Yeah, he's someone who adores Emily because she's a killer, because she's intelligent, because she's incredible at her job. But just because of the way he was raised, you know, what was instilled in him, there's just this feeling that he needed to get there first. And I don't think those feelings make him a bad guy. You know, I really don't. Like, I think this is a societal, systemic problem. But, you know, obviously what he does with those feelings and how he weaponizes his pain and insecurity against her in increasingly kind of violent ways is not acceptable. But that I think that scene was really about establishing the modern man to me as someone who is both not threatened, but also threatened, you know, based on how they are.
In keeping with the essence of the book, as I was talking about before, the last page of Erasure, sort of after the plot is done, has this Latin phrase that I wasn't familiar with. And it's apparently used in relation to complex mathematical equations. And the rough translation is, I offer no hypothesis. And so to me, you know, if I wanted to keep up with the spirit of that, then I couldn't make a movie that was didactic, that felt like it was like spoon feeding people morality and lessons. And so there's this scene toward the end of the film in which Monk, played by Jeffrey Wright, encounters Issa Rae's character Centaura, and they kind of have a conversation about Black art and their ideology when it comes to making art. And when I was reading the novel, I was very excited for that confrontation. It never came, and so when I sat down to adapt it, I knew that was a scene that I wanted to include. And the reason I really like it is because, you know, and people have responded to it in sort of screenings is because it, you know, it depends on the day that I watch it, whose side I fall on. You know, I think that I wrote the damn thing, and I don't know who I agree with more. And to me, that is like I am. I think that, you know, the art that I really like tends to sort of like allow you to go away and sort of like answer the questions for yourself, and it doesn't sort of like it's not really binary and says these people are the good guys and these people are the bad guys. And so I like that scene because it felt like, you know, Jeffrey's character Monk is really pugnacious the entire time. He's arguing with every single person and generally winning those arguments. And you're following this character played by Issa Centaura, who sort of, you know, it's easy to kind of like fall into this trap in thinking that she's like the villain, that she's like she's sort of like this bad artist, and Jeffrey Wright's character is this crusading righteous hero. And then all of a sudden he's confronted with this formidable woman that he's sort of like been underestimating the entire film. And she's got a lot of interesting points as to why she makes the art that she makes and why she does what she does. And sort of, to me, that kind of grappling that we see that we weren't expecting, that sort of like you were expecting Monk to just come in and sort of like bowl this person over because, you know, he's been so arrogant and sort of bullying the entire film. You sort of see like, oh, he's like, all of a sudden the tables have turned. And I think that as the tables are turning on Monk, the tables are turning on the audience as well, who sort of may have been along for the ride and thinking that this person was going to be the villain. And I think that, you know, I just love that scene because it, as I said, like it just I feel confused as to who I agree with more every time that I watch it. I think that is, you know, I think that more art that like leaves you confused and questioning sort of your life as opposed to just telling you who the heroes are and who the villains are. You know, that's always the goal. Yeah.
More interesting.
So with our home stretch here, I am going to throw out some things that for the most part require only a word or a sentence. And please do not be shy. Everybody get ready. Where do you write most frequently?
Cafes.
Office,
Office.
home office.
Home office. Got it.
Where I can.
Wherever.
wherever.
Living room and sometimes on the floor actually to ground myself and get my my head out of my ass sometimes. So just writing on the floor just helps center me. Yeah.
Front room in the morning, cafe in the afternoon.
Well, on what do you write? And I'm going to insist that we start with Eric Roth here because I've heard a little rumor.
Yeah, I have a DOS program.
This is from like
Yeah.
way back.
I only have like 38 pages of memory, and that's it. So it makes you finish the act.
Yeah.
But it's also can't. It's right there. I can print it out, and that's it. It can't go on the internet. And I also have it. I did something wrong, so that I wanted to have it look like typewriting, black on white, but it's for some reason it's white on black. I never think about it anymore.
So do you have to like courier service your pages to people when they want to
Well,
read
what
it?
happens eventually is I have either if I have an assistant, or the production company will have to retype it into final draft. Yeah, and then I don't really have a lot of my movies on there. I have whatever I had done
Right.
to a point, Yeah,
Wow.
so that's what I
Amazing. Okay. Rest of you guys?
Lots of paper to start with,
Handwritten.
handwritten,
Okay.
bits of scenes, just ideas, that kind of thing, then computer.
It's a stained, coffee stained yellow legal pad to start with, and then laptop.
Okay.
Everybody's so romantic with the paper and gloss, and it usually starts in my notes app on my phone,
Yeah.
and then I feel like I would usually write on final draft, but this particular script, because it had to be written bilingually, because this whole script is bilingual, and I wanted it to be written in English with just the Korean parts written in Korean as well, and final draft doesn't support Korean language. So it's absurd, and this is why maybe I'll switch to DOS. And then, but so what happened was I ended up using Writer Duet for Past Lives because they do support it. I eventually guess Writer Duet's gonna call me and ask me to do an ad for them. But I think to me the biggest thing about Final Draft not supporting Korean language to me was when I was first writing it, because it's spec script, there is a kind of a implicit systematic feeling that the whole industry is not, because Final Draft is an industry leading platform. There's a feeling that they really don't want something that's bilingual. There is a kind of there's a messaging that I felt where they were like, Celine, we don't want your script,
I have a feeling
So
there's going to be a
I might change that now.
I hope so,
I do a lot of notes on this. Well, my assistant laughs at me. It's like a book this big and it's just blank pages. It's like a mini whiteboard that I carry around with me. And then eventually I just do yellow Lego pad, and then I type, and I do a whole draft on that, and then I type it up.
On a yellow legal pad?
Yeah.
Whoa, handwritten?
Yeah.
My God.
Cord?
I do final draft. I just do it in final draft. I literally sit in bed and type in final draft.
Favorite part of the writing process?
Everything.
Everything.
I love it from day one. And I've said this many times, if I start to get a writer's block, I change the weather.
I would say that spark of an idea at the beginning, which is like, oh, this could be really good. And then you start writing, you're like, oh, I'm a terrible writer. That's when it gets hard. But that initial idea is like, oh my God, this could be something.
I would say the first draft, just writing, just flowing. Like I start with an outline, so I spend a lot of time on the outline before I get to the first draft. But so like the first draft, it's like I just get to fly because I feel like I've done all the work. So the first draft is nothing but joy, and the second draft is nothing but pain.
No, you go ahead.
Nice.
You go ahead.
After what final draft did to you?
Yes, I should go. What I was just gonna say that you seem to have such a lovely and healthy relationship to writing, because I was gonna say none of it. None of it. I enjoy none of it, but that's not fully true. I feel like I love it when I usually call it like it gets me dancing or something, where like I crack something, where it's like it's been the thing that's been annoying me and frustrating me this whole time, and then there'll just be moments of breakthrough where you're like, oh, it's like it should be set in a different place. Like sometimes it's like not even a huge thing. And then I usually do a little dance because I'm excited that I figured it out.
that?
You saw the beginning of it.
I'm like, so there's a Dorothy Parker quote that I love that is familiar. I agree with you, Celine, which is I hate writing, but I love having written.
Right.
That's the sort of like key. It's like actually every time that I sit down to write, I'm like, this is a miserable experience. What a life I've made for myself. Why am I doing this? What do I think I'm trying to accomplish here? And then as soon as I'm done, I'm like, oh, that was the best thing ever. But literally, it's like as soon as I'm done, it's like I heard once that women have a hormone when they're giving birth that sort of like allows them to forget the pain that they're experiencing, and so that they're willing to go through it again. And so and I feel like that's probably the same hormone that's being released when I'm writing something, is like so that I'm like will go back and do it again because I hate it so much.
I think that's certainly that feels very real. The other thing is also though, I feel like what you were saying that you like the first draft and you don't like second draft is harder. To me, it's the other way because the first draft is the pain of the birth where you're kind of like not even sure what you're writing into, and then the editing that part is enjoyable because then I'm allowed to be my judgy, critical, mean self. But I'm like, why did you do it like that, huh? To my old first draft Celine. That can be like, come on, man. And I think I do enjoy editing quite a bit. Yeah.
I think the only thing I was going to say about that is just like, I feel like for me, the first draft is just like, you get to write without realizing what all the problems are yet, and then the second draft is you have the microscope, you're like, oh, shit. Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Now, I'm everything as well. I just like it, and I like doing it. And it's my favorite part. And
See, these two are proper writers.
well, I don't know what's going to happen to it. I'm like, I'm always philosophic. It's not like it's not tormenting at times, but I love it, and I don't know what's going to happen to it later, what it's going to turn into. But I know I can enjoy one thing about it, and that's doing it.
If you could have written one other script that became a film anytime in history, which would you most like to have written? 2001: A Space Odyssey from Eric.
Network.
I was going to say that, man.
Sorry. Now you can't copy me. I beat you.
I'm going to say, yeah, it's hard. I'm going to say Don't Look Now because I love that film, but I can't even remember what the script was like. But I know I loved the film, so it's tricky.
That's funny. I'm going to say Harold and Maude because I love Harold.
Some Like It Hot.
Harold and Maude.
That's a good one too. Yeah, can I change mine, please?
Yes.
Some Like It Hot.
Oh, yeah.
Has to be.
I'll say Eyes Wide Shut because it has the best last line of a movie ever.
We got two Kubricks right next to each other. Terrific screenplays. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.